Hi, folks. Welcome back. So, we are at the point in the evolution of this channel where I am looking at a legal document, a cease and desist. So, I want to examine what's happening between Amazon and Perplexity, the legal tussle that's going on between them. But I swear I will bring it back to AI agents because I think this is a legal battle, but the crux of it is a technical issue about identity and authentication for AI agents. So let me explain. All right, so as you folks have probably heard, earlier this year, maybe a few months ago, Perplexity released their own agentic browser. It's a fork of Chrome, but what it allows the user to do is specify high-level goals, and then an AI agent will break it down into a set of steps that involves navigating and browsing and searching and so on, and perform those in the web browser. And it can even take actions. So this Comet agent could actually go to Amazon.com and find items, put them in your Amazon cart, and then check out. The problem is that all this happens as you because you're the one who's logged into all these accounts in your browser. So just like your regular browser session, you're logged into Amazon, Google, what have you. It's just that you have this agentic layer on top and it's navigating and taking actions as if you were the one signed in, as if you were the one on the mouse and keyboard. And that's what Amazon is taking issue with. But to successfully deliver AI agents that offer to make purchases on behalf of customers must operate transparently when taking actions on a customer's behalf. The point that Amazon is making essentially is that the entire Amazon website is an experience designed for users. Shopping experience is designed to help customers find and discover products that cater to their needs. And here they mean human customers. By contrast, when Comet shops and makes purchases on the Amazon store, it may not select the best price, etc., etc. Customers may not receive critical product information. This next point is also important, putting the security of customers' data at risk. Because after all, prompt injection is not a solved problem. So it's entirely possible for Comet to take data from a logged in website like Amazon or Google or Gmail or whatever and leak it to other websites that I don't want stuff to go to. Yeah, that's what they're talking about. Particularly troubling given recent reports showing that Comet AI is vulnerable to prompt injection attacks. So the thrust of Amazon's argument is that, look, we built a website made for humans, and you can't just screen scrape it with an agent and treat it as if it were an API. And that's why Amazon or most other companies will clearly differentiate their UI, their web app, from their API offerings. And often APIs and web apps will have very different sets of functionality for exactly this purpose. And then, of course, there's the prompt injection issue. That's the abstract part of the argument. But there's one more thing in here I found really interesting. Perplexity seems to have, let's just say, not built the most transparent implementation of this feature. In November 2024, it had a buy with Pro function, which placed orders on behalf of customers using a small number of Perplexity managed Amazon accounts, including Amazon Prime accounts. So that's not good. If I am an Amazon customer, this is not good at all. That Perplexity is putting in its own kind of fake man in the middle user to place Amazon orders for me. So there's more about the implementation than the overall thrust, but it is, I think, a pretty damning point if true. All right, so based on that cease and desist, a few days after it, Perplexity posted a blog post in response. Bullying is not innovation. Now, it's entirely expected that they play the David versus Goliath card here, but let's look at the actual argument, the actual rebuttal. For the last 50 years, software has been a tool, but with the rise of agentic AI, software is also becoming labor. An assistant, an employee, an agent. The law is clear that large corporations have no right to stop you from owning wrenches. Amazon announced it does not believe in your right to hire labor to have an assistant or an employee acting on your behalf. All right, so there's two issues being conflated here. I really think Perplexity is being a bit disingenuous in this framing. So it's one thing to hire labor, and it's another thing to transparently delegate authority. So I could hire a personal assistant, a human personal assistant, and give them all my logins, and then they would be at a computer signed in as me and place Amazon orders. And I don't think Amazon would have an issue with that. But this is a bit different. To have an assistant or an employee acting on your behalf, an agent is not exactly a human assistant or an employee. And I'll get into the reasons why. It's not just technical reasons. Amazon wants to block you from using your own AI assistant to shop on their platform. Yes, that is what Amazon wants Perplexity to do. If you're logged into Amazon, credentials and Comet are stored only on your device. The Comet assistant finds and purchases the item for you, saving you time. Amazon should love this, but they're more interested in serving you ad-sponsored results and influencing your purchasing decisions with upsells and confusing offers. Well, maybe I want to see the upsell so that it can sell more ads. So I don't think this is the great argument that Perplexity thinks it is. They're essentially saying, hey, we are tantamount to being an ad blocker. And again, that's a violation of terms of service. It's just like, there's plenty of ad blocking extensions in Chrome, and Google mostly ignores them because they're so small. But it is a violation of terms of service, technically and legally speaking, which goes back to the earlier point, which is that Amazon designed a website for human consumption. Okay, so let's see what they say, what Perplexity says about agents over here. User agents are exactly that, agents of the user. They're distinct from crawlers, scrapers, or bots. AI agent has exactly the same permissions you have and acts solely on your behalf. Okay, so this is the crux of the technical issue, and I think this is the main issue at play here. The fact that it has exactly the same permissions you have, that is not a good thing. You really want to be able to differentiate actions you have taken as a human when you are at the keyboard and mouse versus actions taken by an agent on your behalf. You want to be able to tell them apart. Even if I explicitly delegate authority to an agent to carry out actions, after the fact, when I'm looking at an audit log of those actions, I really, really need to be able to tell them apart. Which ones were by a human at the computer versus which ones were done by an agent with delegated authority. And that is not possible in this setup today because I am signed into Comet as myself, as my Amazon user. It's not possible to look at a log of actions and tell those two apart, which ones were done by me at the keyboard and mouse versus which ones were done by Comet. All right, they keep talking about bullying, but actually, I think there's a real technical issue over here. So I think Perplexity over here is arguing for a very crude and, in my opinion, untenable authorization model for agents. So let me talk a little bit about my opinions on this. So back in July, I put this article on my website. I'll leave a link in the description. The core problem is that you want to differentiate between impersonation and delegation. What Comet is doing right now really is full impersonation, full delegation. There's no difference really. You're giving the agent all your credentials. You're giving it your username and password essentially. Every action that the agent takes is logged as an action you took. And so, what you really need is some notion of an agent identity that is different from the human identity. And then you have an explicit delegation of authority from the human to the agent. And there's no infrastructure today that does that. And I talk a little bit about why service accounts or robot accounts are not an answer. These are the kinds of accounts you use for CI/CD pipelines and cron jobs and things like that. But those kinds of accounts and all the infra around it, they're really not designed or intended for human delegation. They're designed for more of these back-end automated batch tasks. What we really want to model is something that is a delegate for a specific human. And by the way, there's a lot of precedent for this in modern life, in legal and technical modern life. For example, there's financial planners or attorneys, and a person can delegate actually very broad pieces of authority to all these other professionals that act on their behalf, like people that manage their money or lawyers and so on. And they can take a lot of really consequential actions on your behalf, but there's always a way to distinguish. There's a way to distinguish when your attorney took a decision or an action on your behalf versus when you yourself did it. So this is not some new concept. It just hasn't been translated to this realm of AI agents. So what I'm asking for here is basically some notion of delegated authority. So when a user authorizes an agent, you need to somehow in your identity layer capture this fact that I, as a user, already have an identity. I'm signed into my Google account, my Amazon account, whatever. But then I need an additional abstraction in the identity layer that A, gives the agent an identity that is different from mine, and B, lets me issue some kind of delegated authority to the agent that links it back to me so that it can be seen that the agent is acting on my behalf. Yeah, so the subject and the actor. You need to explicitly capture the subject and the actor. And I don't really think you can do this at the app layer. So just like you need user identity to be a very common horizontal thing, like signing in with an identity provider like Google or Microsoft and so on, you need it to be at that very basic identity layer. Otherwise, it ends up being too fragmented. You can't rely on it. And look, I actually talk about agentic browser support. So if Chrome had a profile manager, in Chrome you have profiles, right? You can sign in as all these different people. If you had a Chrome profile for an agent with this kind of delegated authority notion, that would be actually, in my opinion, a pretty nice UX. It would let me see explicitly what I'm asking or telling agents to do, and it would let me see that they're doing it in a different profile. They're not impersonating me. So yeah, I think this is the crux of my disagreement with Perplexity's position, that an agent actually should not have exactly the permissions that I have. It should be a different entity, and it should be modeled as such in the identity layer. Now, fortunately, OpenID and the folks at OpenID are actually beginning to think about this issue. They recently put out this paper talking about identity management for agentic AI, and they talk a lot about these kinds of issues, this general problem of how to model identity for AI agents. And coming from a standards body, this is a long and detailed paper. It talks about all the underlying protocols and really the details of modeling this. But here's the central problem that they're looking at, which is exactly all the things we just talked about before, which is you want to authenticate an agent. So an agent has its own identity. This confirms the agent is the legitimate entity it claims to be. So just like you authenticate humans, you can authenticate agents. And then you have this notion of delegation. The human user must be authenticated and their intent to delegate specific permissions to the agent must be captured. And I think this whole tussle between Amazon and Perplexity, this legal tussle, actually boils down to this technical question of how you manage identity. I don't think that agents, especially in the consumer world, especially in the browser, will make a lot of headway until this authentication and delegation issue is solved. All right, if you stuck around till now, thanks. Would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Leave a comment. If you like content like this, consider subscribing, like the video, and I will see you next time. Thank you.